Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar where we'll be taking a look at how product sustainability can be used to deliver real business benefits. My name is Stephen Kennett and I look after the supply chain portfolio here at 2 Degrees. I'm delighted to welcome our presenters today. We have Sandy Smith of PE International, who has a wealth of experience in product sustainability and sustainability strategy. We're also lucky to be joined by David Hopkins of the Timber Trade Federation and Jamie Shaw of Jaguar Land Rover. Today's presentations will last around 40 minutes, which will leave us with 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. Before we begin, I'd just like to remind everyone that you can submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A box on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. Just type in your question and press send, and we'll wait until the end before answering as many as we can. As an aside, if you should have any technical issues during the presentation, please use the chat box on the right-hand side to send me a message, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. So without any further delay, I'd like to hand over to Sandy, who'll get us started with today's presentation. So over to you, Sandy.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining today. I'll give a quick introduction to what we're going to talk about. I'm going to do a quick assessment of the business case for product sustainability. Then David is going to do 10 minutes with the view from the Timber Trade Federation with regard to what they're doing with regard to wood. And then Jamie's joining from Jaguar Land Rover. And then I'll wrap up the end with some of the pitfalls that we've seen with regard to how businesses are creating business plans with regard to product sustainability, then the Q&A. Quick introduction for PE, for those who don't know us. We think of ourselves as the number one product sustainability organisation. We've got offices around the globe. I myself look after the UK operations. And as well as doing product sustainability services, consultancy work, we also have two pieces of software. Gabby, which is a product sustainability piece of software, and Sophie, which is an enterprise sustainability software. And we also sit on a wealth of data from a range of different areas, from electronics, construction, agricultural, plastics, you name it. We've probably got the environmental assessment data within our databases. We're also lucky enough to work with some fantastic clients, probably more than 1,800 now, across a wide range of sectors that kind of trust us to support them in their product sustainability work, which is quite a nice client list and something that we're very proud of. The context of sustainability, and I'm sure we've all seen this before and heard it, but I kind of want to put my slant on it. The big aspect for me is the increase in population growth. Increasing up to 9 billion as we go forward, 7 billion currently. So not only do we have increasing amount of people on the planet, the people there also have increasing amounts of demands with regard to their standard of living. And that is fundamentally driving a problem about how we achieve growth through business, which of course is absolutely fundamental to the sustainability agenda, but how we do this when the resources that we have are finite and limited, and the pressures on that are becoming immense. So there's something in there for me about the step change that I think perhaps we need to be engaging with regard to resource efficiency. Global warming, we all know about. Scarce materials, we all know about. Waste, of course, there's water. There's all sorts of other issues that aren't on this list. That resources are becoming absolutely critical, and addressing resource use through products is absolutely critical for business success. And this is part of, for me, a kind of a growing trend. Sustainability is a performance issue, so the purpose of this webinar is to talk about creating the business case. So we've got to look about where we've come from and where we're going. So right now, I think it's critical for business. But I was kind of thinking, when I was kind of writing this presentation, 14 years ago, I did my first presentation to Balfour Beatty. And I wasn't even allowed to talk about sustainability. I stood up, I said I'd like to talk about life cycle assessment, and I was told by the MD to sit down. And in 14 years, I think we've moved a tremendous way. So when we're thinking about the business case, it's important to think about where we've come from, and of course where we'll be in the next 3, 4, 5, if not 10 years. So this is a real trend now, and we'll hopefully show the value in the presentation today, but also the future. I think the trend is going to be growing. People talk about a leap of faith in terms of this business plan. We had a lot of the people that were at 2 Degrees Live in London a while ago. I heard this phrase, leap of faith, when we're creating a business plan. I first heard it with Unilever, with Paul Polman, who've created quite a significant and challenging environmental plan. And he kind of looked at all the data and all the evidence and got so far, but couldn't get to where he needed to be without this leap of faith. And within these business plans, I think we'll look at different businesses being in different places. Some organizations will take a leap of faith that want to be right at the cutting edge and providing the leadership position and really demonstrating significant resource efficiencies. And of course, there'll be ones at the other end where there are some still tremendous cost reductions, some tremendous increases in sales that can be had without having a leap of faith. So the question when you're developing your business plan is how far you want to go and at what pace. Some of them might have a leap of faith. There might be a gap in terms of the evidence base that can be provided, and some, I believe, there'll be some concrete business cases to be able to make improvements. And there were also some differences. So looking at the delegates list today, it was great to see a whole range of different organizations, and I can understand that in that business case, there's certainly a difference between the business-to-business type organizations and the business-to-consumer type organizations in terms of how they'll create their business plan. And of course, there's sector differences. Some sectors, for us in particular, the construction sector is one where there's a very strong business case, both in the UK and Europe and the US and other regions. And in some sectors, it's less. So how far you may go and the ease of which you can create a solid business case, I think would be dependent on a number of those factors. So starting at the start, if we're looking to create a business case on product sustainability, what is product sustainability? For me, it could mean a whole load of different terms, and I'm not too fussed about which term is being used. And all these terms on the screen at the moment, of course, mean different aspects. But what I wanted to get it away from, it's not just about life cycle assessment. Jim Farver was talking to me about 4 or 5 years ago at one of our product sustainability roundtables and kind of said, it's not about LCA, it's about product sustainability. We have carbon footprints, we have water footprints. There's many different types of LCAs. There's streamlined LCAs. There's ones using secondary data, primary data. We have life cycle thinking, eco-labels, et cetera, closed-loop thinking, kind of a new phrase that's come onto the block. So when we talk about product sustainability, I'm kind of generally summing those up within that phrase. So just to be clear, we're not just talking about just LCAs. So this diagram here for me kind of encapsulates the core aspects of the business case. But I'll start with the phrase at the top. I'm sure lots of us have seen survey data. This one's from McKinsey. There's lots of them that talk about CEOs saying sustainability is a priority. This one's 73%. 80% of executives think sustainability is critical to business success. There's tons of these phrases about. And why all that's really positive, what strikes me about this phrase, or these types of phrases, is that if they think it's a priority, I'm kind of concerned. If 73% think what they're doing currently is a priority, I think they're probably kidding themselves. So I'd encourage the kind of CEOs to really think about whether they think it's a priority. I think it should be a priority, but I think as businesses we need to be doing a little bit more to be kind of moving forward on the resource efficiency agenda for the reasons which we hope to set out in this presentation with a strong business plan. Cost reduction is still key for me. We come across this time and time again with clients where we're identifying cost reduction savings. It might be 10% on your global packaging costs. That with some simple assessments and simple tools, that you can look at them and identify savings. And by savings, you're designing your packaging with less resources, and then therefore improving the environmental performance of your packaging. There are many organisations that have been doing cost reduction activities for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, but are still finding 50k, 100k savings in factories and processes and transport aspects every year. So there are huge amounts of cost reduction still to be taken out of our businesses and out of our value chains, particularly if you're starting fresh. But even if you've been doing it for a number of years, I'm sure you're aware that there's still lots to have. And then flipping to, I think the important side for me is the increased revenue. So we might work with an organisation and say, okay, well, we need to look at its resource efficiency of our product, and we need to find £1 million of saving at the same time, which is great. But the big numbers, I think it's something that's often missing, is the 1%, 2%, 3%, 10% even increase on sales. So if you look at your turnover and say, well, can I make a business case that through my environmental credentials of my products that I can increase my sales by 3%, 4%, whatever it might be, then I think you're then starting to look at some very large numbers. Particularly in the business-to-business sector, particularly in certain sectors like construction, I think there is some really strong evidence that demonstrating, quantifying the environmental performance of your products really goes a long way to increasing that revenue. Risk management is also always there. There's been lots of high-profile cases about if you understand your supply chain, understand your value chain properly, you can avoid certain risks. But also in your communication, unless you're understanding your product sustainability from an assessment like a life cycle assessment or a carbon footprint or a water footprint, whatever you've done, unless you've provided some quantification, you can certainly have some risks with perhaps some spurious marketing claims, which again can get you into trouble. I'll come to that point again later on in the presentation. Again, we're focusing on products today, and I think kind of the key for the successful business strategy is kind of investing in the R&D function to develop new products. We've kind of worked with clients like SKF, who are a bearings manufacturer. They have a program called Beyond Zero, and I spent a lot of time working with them, developing their innovation, their R&D function to produce better products. So they produce a bearing. They produce a bearing that goes into a stop-start system, which goes into a Jaguar car or a BMW car or an Audi car, which then improves the credentials of that car, which increases their sales. If they can produce a slightly better bearing, they can produce a slightly better stop-start system and provide an increase in sales. And at the heart of that, I think, is investing in the R&D function, the design function for your products. And I think businesses that we're working with are seeing the benefits of that process. In terms of the aspects for product sustainability, you could be working internally or externally. You could be working through, and I think in the future, I think this will be increasing regulatory-driven processes as well as strategic processes. But similar to my kind of phrase at the start about what's product sustainability, there's lots of different aspects there, like LCA carbon footprint. There's lots of different outcomes that product sustainability has been working on, from labeling to greenhouse gas management to cost assessment reductions in this bottom left-hand corner, to industry benchmarking, to sales support, and of course, up in the top right-hand corner, environmental reporting and regulatory compliance. And this slide is kind of designed to just say that you can start on your business strategy about start from the bottom and work up. So part of it is what are the returns, but also what is the investment. So you don't have to start with a very significant long-term investment. You can start at the bottom with some simple screening, material comparisons, some very basic assessments to find some cost benefits, to identify some risks, and to communicate some sustainability performance of your products. And that's where many organizations start, and it doesn't have to cost a fortune. then as you move through the maturity of your product sustainability, you'll increase in value, you'll increase investment, and go forward to aspects like value chain optimization and kind of portfolio sustainability management, which I think is kind of, one of the new areas which is, I think, really quite critical about how you basically scale up. If you have 20,000, 30,000 products, how do you work and how do you find a cost-effective solution to work at product sustainability for 20,000, 30,000 products? I've heard it said time and time again, you can't do this. You can look at one product, but once you start scaling these things up, it becomes too complicated. I think while that was true 2 or 3 years ago, I think there are now cost-effective solutions out there on the marketplace. As long as you can manage your data, as long as you can think about the right methodology, and as long as you can use kind of the power of software, I think that's available now to provide seamless integration of data, I think you can manage product sustainability across a complex range of products and a large number of products without it costing the earth. And again, 3 or 4 years ago, we couldn't do that. So I think one is the return side, but also I think the investment side, this business case is also becoming lower cost. This phrase, I wish it was a joke. It's supposed to be a joke, but it's not. It's true. How do I know if your company is environmentally friendly? The wording, the typeface, the pictures, the nature in the brochure. There's companies in the press this week. I'm not going to mention any names, but they're large multinational companies that have come up with nice phrases, but without providing any quantification. And they're therefore getting pulled up by the various advertising agencies that are watching for greenwash. It's disappointing to see the amount of greenwash increasing in the marketplace. So we're kind of encouraging that any product sustainability strategy and business case is based on hard, quantified numbers. Anyone that's heard Ramon from Interface talk will hear him passionately speak about the beauty contest, the phrases, the images, the countless labels that have been created by different industry groups, different organizations, I think providing standardization and some common metrics so we can compare products, and I can choose product A versus product B on a standard comparison is something where I think in certain sectors we now have, which is great. But as part of this business case, I think your product sustainability strategy has to be based on some robust data and some robust numbers. So I'm going to hand over to one of our companies that we're doing some work with at the moment, David Hopkins, and he's going to provide you with an overview of some work he's doing called Wood First Plus.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sandy. That was a good, comprehensive overview of all work to do with product footprinting. We at a group I run a group called Wood for Good, which is the timber industry's sustainability and communications wing, if you like. And we are leading on a multi-stakeholder project working with PE, looking at a number of aspects of life cycle analysis for the timber industry. We've got a lot of different partners involved. It's quite a big project for the timber industry. We've got the Timber Trade Federation, Forestry Commission, TRADA, there's Scottish Enterprise are involved, and a whole host of other bodies who are keen to make this work. And there's been a lot of movement within the sort of forestry and timber sector in the UK over the past couple of years, not least sparked by the government's moves to sell off the forest estate a couple of years ago, which caused a huge backlash against it, and people were looking at new ways of invigorating the sector. So we work obviously in the construction industry. That's our biggest market for the timber industry, and the construction industry, possibly more than any other, but I'll probably stand corrected on that, has a huge drive for data going on. The construction sector as a whole is one of the biggest consumers of natural resources. It's one of the biggest causes, I think, 47% of emissions in the UK. We are, as a sector, responsible for a huge amount of waste, and as a result, there is a huge drive across all markets, across all sectors, to improve that environmental performance. And part of that is a huge drive for data. Whether I've put some things on there, things like the Code for Sustainable Homes, the BREEAM assessment method. All of these different various codes and regulatory systems are looking for hard data to feed into them so that the people specifying materials and the people delivering and building buildings can say to the communities in which they are delivered that this is a sustainable addition to your community. A building's quite a big physical obstacle. It's quite a huge presence in anybody's town or village, and so the people living there quite rightly want to know that this is this is not a detrimental impact on their planet, but a sustainable addition to it. And there are a number of different systems and frameworks within which architects, contractors, specifiers, and developers are all working, and they are all requiring more and more data. The data is going to affect all of the material choices. On a design data front, specifiers and designers of buildings are looking for very lean design, lean manufacture. They're looking for responsibly sourced materials. It's an increasingly important factor. They're looking for sort of carbon neutral or zero carbon buildings or manufacturing processes. They want to see that you're trying to do everything you can to minimize site waste, to maximize your recycling and recycled content. There's increasing pressure now to show your operational carbon values, but also the embodied carbon within a product, and likewise with water. As Sandy's mentioned, there's an increasing need for life cycle assessment data. That's going to become a mandatory requirement in the construction sector for all products in a few years' time. It was going to be in 2016. I think it's now pushed back a few years to 2020, but it is coming. People are going to be asking for it more and more. Some contractors are already asking for it for certain schemes, like BREEAM. If you haven't got life cycle assessment data for the products, they don't get assessed. They don't win points in the BREEAM assessment scheme. So we, as a sector, have to respond to that. There's this clear market driver that says if you don't have the data, if you can't prove the environmental provenance and worth of your products, you don't get a sale because you won't feature in the various regulatory frameworks which award points to the developers. So within that, the timber industry has got a good story to tell. We've certainly got the lowest energy inputs of any mainstream construction product. Trees only take sunlight and water to grow. They absorb and they store carbon. Other data and other tests that we've got from other places around the world show that more is emitted more carbon is absorbed and stored in trees than is emitted from the harvesting, the processing, the transporting. We create habitats while they're growing. It's fairly lightweight. It's easy to transport. It provides a great low-carbon fuel at the end of life, and it's a renewable material. We can keep planting. We can keep going with this, and it drives the growth of forests. I think about 40% of Europe now, which is where the majority of the UK timber comes from, is covered with forest cover. We're only harvesting about 60% of the annual growth of that forest. So it's got a good, strong environmental story to tell. However, we have struggled in the past to prove it as an industry. We've had an historic reliance, as Sandy showed in some of the diagrams earlier, we've had an historic reliance on an image of an industry rather than the hard data. It's been very slow to respond to this. We've relied on the fact that a natural product obviously has a better environmental profile than a manufactured or a synthetic product, and as a result, the competing industries which have been deemed to have a worse environmental footprint have moved ahead, and quite right too. They've moved ahead with their own studies. They've got hard data. They've got hard facts to show, and they've done a very good job about positioning themselves in the marketplace as a strong, sustainable industry. They've developed their own sustainability policies. They've done a lot of work to reduce their energy use, to improve their end-of-life performance, and they've gained a strong marketing advantage as a result, leaving us sort of in second place as an industry. So, as a result, we have come up with a project called Wood First Plus. The idea is to devise a sort of one-stop shop, an online portal for all the environmental and design data that the market will demand. We're working with PE to develop all of the life cycle assessment data. That will allow us to meet the requirements of the market at the moment for all the data, but also to to help devise an industry performance and sustainability program to improve performance in those areas where we can see weaknesses and we can see high impact. We know that, for example, kilning and drying of timber is probably the biggest energy demand, biggest global warming potential aspect of our operations. There are increasing moves now. Certainly the bigger operators are using their own wood waste, their own sort of biomass to create their own heat and power on site and to lower that profile across the board. We're certainly hoping that the results of this study can help us do more and introduce other policies and programs to improve that in other areas. It'll have a lot of the data for BIM, the collaborative construction software programs, and the carbon data, and it's going to be online, and importantly, it's going to be free, so that we can pump that out to all of our kind of key audiences. We can use that data then to do whole building modelling, and we can show a lot of different outcomes as a result. We're going to be putting the data itself in its raw form is probably not much use to anybody. What we will be doing is putting those two bits of data into the Wood First Plus database, and then that can get translated into the various software packages that structural engineers and architects and others use. And of course, we'll be able to present it much more neatly around individual products. There's a core list of about 20-odd products which form the sort of the bulk of the industry, and from which a whole range of anything from timber frame housing to panels to a whole range of other sort of aspects of a building get built, and you'll be able to model that using the data that gets done. The slide here shows what an actual environmental product declaration looks like. I think that's for a company called EGA, one of our members and one of our supporters. We won't be producing the full environmental product declarations for each and every company, but it is all the data that's contained in there will be on that database, and individual companies can produce an EPD should they wish to, and go through with that. All of the information then is really to back up a campaign that we launched called Wood First. We launched the campaign in 2012, and it was a catalyst in a way for all of the other then subsequent studies that we're going to be doing. The Wood First campaign was based on campaigns and regulations which have happened elsewhere in the world, which call for a Wood First rule in planning guidance, requiring wood to be considered where feasible as the primary construction material in all publicly funded new build and refurbishment projects. And the reason that countries from as far as part of Canada and France and New Zealand and parts of Germany and now Slovenia, I understand, and elsewhere in the world have introduced this is all part of their climate targets. There are statutory obligations which exist in the UK in the planning regime towards delivering sustainable communities, and there are climate targets nationally and then broken down onto a sector level in most countries now. And a lot of people and a lot of countries have realised that actually a greater use of wood in construction can help lower the environmental impact of that construction sector. It can lead to the growth of more forests and have a sort of a positive environmental benefit. In the UK, we had to prove it on a UK scale using UK data, and we couldn't do that. When we launched the campaign, we couldn't actually pull all that data together in one place to provide the hard evidence base that they have in other countries. And that has been the impetus for doing the Wood First Plus study, and it will lead us back then to continue with that campaign. We've done some sort of preliminary academic modelling, some of it which was paid for by DEC actually, which shows that in 2010, taking 2010 as a base year, there were 33 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent embodied in UK materials and in the construction sector. The amount of timber or the amount of carbon sequestered and stored within timber products in UK building at the same year was averaged out at about 22 million tonnes. So it's 2/3 of the total carbon output, if you like, for the construction sector that could be, you could account for and mitigate through a greater use of timber in construction. It requires a lot of other factors to come into play. It requires a sort of a change in policy, but we will be using the data not just to inform our own industry performance, not just to sell that individual product and to use individual data around a product, but to keep pushing forward with this campaign to say that by using wood first, or certainly considering it as a first choice, you can help reduce the impacts across the construction sector. So that, in a nutshell, is the nuts and bolts of our project.
Thank you very much. The phrase I love there is the no data, no sale phrase. So I think it's something that I'd be interested to hear about in terms of the attendees that are on the list, whether they really kind of see that as a kind of a statement that's true in other sectors. I think it's supported in construction, but if anyone has any views on other sectors about this no data, no environmental data, no EPD, no sale, I'd be interested to hear that in the discussions. So now I think we've got Jamie from Jaguar Land Rover, I'm hoping.
Yes, can you hear me?
Fantastic, I can hear you. Brilliant. Over to you then, Jamie.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Slightly different products, I suppose, that we're going to deal with now, but some commonality with the timber industry around life cycle assessment. So thank you for the invitation to speak to you today about some of our product sustainability activity, and in particular the work we're doing around life cycle assessment. It's a particularly interesting challenge at the moment, in a very exciting time in the company's history, with unprecedented levels of programme activity and also profitability, which has an important role to play. I've been asked to focus on some of the processes that we go through, how we go about doing a life cycle assessment, some of the resources involved in that activity. So I've got 5 slides basically to explain where I sit in the organisation, because I think that's quite important, so you've got an understanding on that side of things. Briefly explain the process that we go through and the type of results that we get from that process. Give you an insight to the resources that we use to do all of that. Cover some of the benefits at a high level from that process, and then finish by showing how we're trying to use that data, that knowledge that we're gaining to influence future products. So in terms of where I sit within the organisation, it's very much within the product side of things. So within the vehicle engineering activity of Jaguar Land Rover, we have what we call vehicle attribute teams, of which sustainability is one of 17. We've got about 30 people working across a range of sustainability activities. The life cycle work takes place within the environment attribute, which is effectively a sub-attribute of sustainability. We've got about 12 people in that team. You can see from the pie chart on the left-hand side the kind of scope of my particular activities as technical specialist for whole vehicle sustainability. So there's quite a few different areas that I'm involved in, but for the purposes of today, I'll narrow that down to just the life cycle management side of things. There are also a number of other teams involved in elements of vehicle development that will have an impact from a sustainability perspective, so I've listed those out on the slide. They are separate for the team that I sit in, but obviously we work very closely with them to build our knowledge and understanding of the vehicles. So that's a bit of background as to where I sit within the organisation. In terms of the process that we go through, I probably should add that a vehicle is probably about as complicated a product as you can get to do a life cycle assessment on. I'm going to focus on the new Range Rover and walk you through some of the results that we've got for that particular vehicle. But we are talking about something like 1,800 components, a supply chain that delves down to about 7 levels. So there's a lot of information that we need to try and gather to understand what the life cycle impacts of the vehicle are. We do that by identifying what we think is going to be the major seller of a new vehicle and work out what derivative we're going to study. We'll then obtain a bill of materials for that particular vehicle. We'll also walk back to the outgoing model to understand what vehicle we're going to compare for the new model. So we've got two processes in effect running, as I say, in a lot of detail. So once we've got the bill of materials, we've then got an understanding of the entire material mix across a vehicle, and the vehicles can weigh up to anything in the region of 2.4, 2.5 tonnes, depending on which derivative you pick. We'll then take all of that material information along with manufacturing information, so we'll take real data from our manufacturing activities and build that into the process. We'll then apply a usage phase of 200,000 kilometres, so we predict that to be about 10 years of the vehicle's life. We'll combine that with all of the fuel required to run the vehicle during the use phase, and we'll also look at end of life. And all of that information, all of that data goes into the process. Obviously that's a lot of data that needs to be calculated, so we use the Gabi software, like most of the other vehicle manufacturers, to process that information. And in terms of the results that we get out, I'll just walk you through a brief example. So this is showing you the old Range Rover, the outgoing model, and the brand new Range Rover that was launched last year. So the old vehicle is the blue bar chart and the new vehicle is the green one. This is showing you the results at the vehicle level across the 5 impact categories that we studied at the time. We now include water as a 6th impact category, but we didn't have that capability last year when we did this particular study. So you can see here, the key thing I should point out actually in the left-hand column, so the global warming potential, that particular column is in tonnes, whereas the other figures are in kilograms. But just to try and fit it all onto the same graph, we've scaled it in that way. So you can see that the new vehicle has quite a significant improvement in terms of its life cycle impact compared to the outgoing model, and that's a combination of improved powertrain efficiency, so reduced tailpipe emissions, a significant reduction in weight of the vehicle, so we took over 400 kilograms out of the old vehicle, primarily through the use of aluminium, but making the body lighter has allowed us to lightweight some of the other systems in the vehicle. So that's a quick snapshot of the results across the different impact categories. So we're trying to get a holistic understanding across all components, all systems within the vehicle, across a range of environmental factors, not just tailpipe emissions, which is the one we tend to be regulated on. If I now show you the same results, but focusing just on global warming potential, or CO2 equivalent, these results are now spread across the different life cycle phases of the vehicle. There's some key things to highlight here. You'll be able to see that we've taken quite a significant increase in the materials production phase of the vehicle, and that's because of the use of aluminium, or much greater use of aluminium I should say, in the new Range Rover. That's more energy intensive to produce than steel, but that near 3 tonne increase is more than offset by the use phase, where you can see there's quite a significant reduction there, and again that comes down to the lighter vehicle, the more efficient powertrains that we fitted, reducing emissions there. But I think it's also important to point out the very small proportion that the other phases, such as transport and logistics, the actual manufacturing of the vehicle, so the assembly line in effect, and also the end of life, what small proportion they actually play in the overall life cycle of the vehicle. And obviously getting this level of data gives us quite a useful insight into the impacts of the product in different phases of its lifetime. So that's a quick background on the results. In terms of a bit of an insight into the resources that we've used to go through that process, well, I guess the work started about 5 years ago, primarily on life cycle assessment for us as a team, before my time with the company. But we think about 6 months' time was spent investigating tools and processes that we could use to carry out a life cycle assessment on a vehicle. Now that may be longer than some of you need if you've not started this journey, but as I say, a vehicle is a pretty complex product, so we needed to make sure we understood the process in quite a lot of detail before we could actually run that internally as a company. And the first vehicle that we ran that process on was the Jaguar XJ that was launched in 2009. We think there were about 4 people involved across a range of departments, there. So these are people who are providing significant input to the process. Obviously there are other people involved, but that worked out at about a combined 12 months level of activity. We also had external support from PE International and obviously the Gabby software, but we also took that process through third-party verification, and we used the Vehicle Certification Agency here in the UK for that activity. At the end of that, we'd obviously got a verified process, and we were able to demonstrate that actually the new vehicle had an 8.3% improvement compared to the outgoing vehicle. Key thing, I won't go through the same level of detail in each one. You can obviously see the information on screen, but we've been through the same process for the Range Rover Evoque when that was launched in 2011, and as I mentioned earlier, the Range Rover last year. But I think the key thing to highlight is actually once we've been through the process once, we can obviously identify ways to streamline and reduce the amount of time that we're taking to carry out that process, and you can see from some of the results that we've got there, different levels of results on the vehicle, but one of the key things that we've done is improve the process, and in particular improve the data sets, and I'll come back onto that particular point on my last slide. We're currently going through the same process, 3 vehicles at the same time, which is another challenge for us, partly to do with just the level of vehicle activity that we've got going on at the moment, but also the fact that we're widening the net in terms of the people involved in the project. So rather than it being tied up in a kind of core team of 1 or 2 people, we're actually extending the number of people within the environment attribute who are involved in that particular process. Now, I haven't released the results there because we're still going through, or we've yet to go through the verification process, but what we have identified so far is that there is a reduction in all of the vehicles. So hopefully that's given you a bit of insight into the resources we've used. In terms of business benefits, quite a few here. The first one may sound quite obvious, but if you think of plug-in electric vehicles or full battery electric vehicles, current legislation focuses on tailpipe emissions. Now those types of vehicles, particularly essentially electric vehicles, of course have no tailpipe emissions, but they've still got a significant life cycle impact. You've got to generate the electricity that they run on somehow, and by looking at life cycle, obviously we can take all of that into account, and we can identify what we can do in the material selection phase and in the use phase to reduce those impacts. By looking at life cycle assessment, we're also getting a holistic view of the impact of the vehicle across its entire lifetime, which hopefully you're able to pick up from my earlier slide. If you only look at production emissions or vehicle emissions in the use phase, obviously you're not getting that, you're just getting a snapshot in time. And to put that into context, if we looked at material production only, you'd never choose aluminium because obviously that's identified that there's an increase in the materials production phase, but by looking at the life cycle we can determine that you get that benefit back in the use phase. What we're also able to do is drill down into an awful lot of detail when looking at a vehicle derivative. So we're able to identify which systems and which materials within those systems in the vehicle are generating the highest emissions. That then enables us to go and discuss with that particular system owner, component owner, that part of the business, to identify what we can do to reduce the impacts of their decisions. We're also able to identify where there may be cost opportunities within the supply chain, and actually by having this level of data it gives us a great opportunity to go and engage very closely and build a really good relationship with certain suppliers around their particular activities, their production processes, and we can then build in data that's relevant to any activities they've done to improve sustainability of their own operations into our process to make sure we're reflecting the true picture. My penultimate point, which hopefully some of you can agree with, is that actually by going through this process, one of the key things we can do is use science, and in particular maths, to actually justify why it's right to reduce environmental impact. Now, I've worked in the environment and sustainability industry for 12 years or so. Certainly when I first started, it was very difficult, unless there was a piece of legislation, to always get business support or business buy-in to carrying out certain activities. But we're certainly working with engineering companies throughout my career. Now that we have detailed data that we can go and talk to engineers and identify what they can do to make an improvement is a significant step forward. And the final point is really, having been through this process and generated this type of data, for the reasons I've already mentioned, it gives you plenty of opportunities. But actually what we found particularly interesting in the last couple of years is getting in and talking to people about this is the kind of snowball effect. And actually they mention it to someone else, and all of a sudden, before you know it, there's lots of opportunities and lots of projects for you to get involved in and use this kind of process, these tools, that kind of data and experience to influence different things, and particularly areas where environment and sustainability may not previously have been on the agenda. And my final slide, very quickly, is just to kind of summarise all of that and show how we're trying to apply those lessons learned, that data, that knowledge, that experience into future programme activity. So the diagram currently on screen shows you where, in terms of a vehicle development programme, we've done our work historically. And that is pretty much as the vehicle's about to be launched. Once we've got a full bill of materials for that particular vehicle, we've been able to go through the detailed process that I explained earlier and generate some results for that vehicle. Now obviously when we first did that, we weren't able to affect any change on that particular vehicle. It's already been designed, it's already been engineered, and it's pretty much in production. But the key is to take that knowledge and that experience and apply it much earlier in the process. So on the back of that, what we've been able to do is create a process, a framework, and a suite of tools that allow us to use life cycle assessment to influence different levels of projects. And we can use it from the very start, so actually influence a vehicle concept, but we can also use that process to affect any research activities, but also guide that research activity and direct them down a certain route. And obviously what we can also do is look at existing programs that are coming through the development process and identify where there may be opportunities to change materials, change suppliers, as well as benchmark some of the competition and see how we're progressing. Appreciate that's a pretty quick run through, but hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into A, some of the complexity, but B, some of the process and the results that we've got from focusing on product sustainability over the last few years.
That's fantastic. I think I've been made presenter again. That's fantastic, Jamie. So we've had one case study from Timber, which is more in the business-to-business type arena, and we've had one from Jamie, which I guess is more directed to business-to-consumers. We're getting tight on time, so I'm going to go through this quickly because I can see lots of questions and things flashing up on my screen with questions and answers coming through, so I want to make sure that we leave enough time for that. So if the technology works, can I go forward? Press some buttons. There we go. Pitfalls. Really quickly, the pitfalls kind of been mentioned by some of the people and some of my early presentations, but as you start on the product sustainability journey, you don't have to start off with this all singing, all dancing tool. You don't have to start off with this tremendous amount of primary data. You can start off with these directional tools, these light touch tools, the ones that can get the quick wins in the design process, and you can move through that process as you look to design more sustainable products towards full LCA as you go through. So you can balance the time and resource and the cost with the different stages of the design process, and also the different stages within your product sustainability journey. So you can fit it in, so you don't have to spend too much too soon. So that's one pitfall I want people to avoid. And the second one is that, people have mentioned tools, which is great, but in that business case, to change it into the value proposition, the tool is not enough. So I've worked with clients where, we're coming up with a design process, but there's no real driver for the outputs of the design. There's no point putting a design process into a business to create better products if no one cares in the business about you creating better products. There's going to be no pull from the corporate. There's not going to be pull from the leadership team. There's no point putting tools in place unless there's the training packages in there in order for these tools to be used. And the skills tools for them to be used in the business. So when we talk about tools and we talk about the business case, it's not just about going in and doing an LCA or doing a carbon footprint. You've got to think about the business case, about how do we link this up. I don't know what Jamie was talking about when we were talking about the 6 people, but it seemed about the people in JLR, the touch points in the business were growing. So it's kind of encouraging to see in businesses that product sustainability work used to be one person in a room, two people in a room, and as it goes mature, you start to talk to the C-level part of the organisation, you start to talk to the marketing team, you start to talk to the engineering team. So linking all this up needs to be part of the consideration of the business plan. I'm going to skip through that and quickly say there's lots of free advice, more case studies, and work that you can get from either PE websites or the 2 Degrees website, which will help build and put some more meat on the bones on the case study, on the business plan. So there's case studies, video tutorials, more white papers with more numbers about X business did this and saved X amount of money. And of course, we're happy to talk and support any organisation who are thinking about going into this space and need to develop a robust business plan. I'm going to leave it there, which gives us, I think, 10 minutes to answer some of the questions that have been coming through. Stephen, are you with us?
Yeah. So great. Thank you, Sandy. Yeah, we'll get through as many questions as we can now in the time remaining. So just to kick off here, someone's saying no data, no sale. In the US, unfortunately, at the business to consumer level, the consumer has yet to really engage in any meaningful consumption behaviour that demands the data for the sale. So Sandy, could you maybe sort of have a talk about what the obstacles are that need to be overcome?
And it would be interesting to hear from Jamie as well about maybe the differences between what consumers in Europe or other regions and the US with regard to the information that JLR. But I mean, it's true. I know from a business to business, there's still strong drivers in things like the construction sector, but business to consumer in the UK and Europe and also clearly in the States. No matter, you can read a 1,000,001 survey saying that they care, but actually finding the evidence of them actually buying sustainable products is incredibly difficult to do. Arguably, it's not there, particularly in the US. So I think again, it's balancing your business case with the markets and your drivers. And if it's not there and there isn't a driver, then we'd advocate not doing it. But I think US is one particular market where the consumer have yet to get on board with the issues at hand, more so than some of the other markets. I think China is an emerging market where the consumer is making strong demands and it's growing. Other markets in the Middle East are also growing. US is one that's lagging behind. So just balance it out. But perhaps if Jamie would just make a comment on that as well with regard to Jaguar Land Rover sales and European and environmental data.
Yeah, of course.
That'd be great.
I guess the majority of consumers in terms of environmental performance are interested in fuel economy of the vehicles, but what we're starting to see is that different markets, and it's not necessarily the traditional ones or the ones that we would expect to be more aware of environmental performance, actually demand certain levels of kind of product sustainability, or expect that to be inherent in the product. Now, it's not necessarily a holistic view like I've given you from a life cycle perspective. They don't walk into the dealership and demand to see the data at that level, but there's different elements. So my very first slide kind of explaining my role, or the overview of my role, what we're seeing is that there's different parts of that in different markets. Customers are actually expecting us to be better than the competition in terms of some of those activities.
Just to add to that, I think that's true. I think on a consumer level, it's very hard to get a consumer to engage because price will outweigh a lot of other things. Whereas on a business level, regulation obviously can play a far greater part. What it does do, I guess, from a Jaguar Land Rover point of view, it adds into the whole mix about the brand and the image and the reputation and all of those sorts of things to give you an advantage or to stand out in the market with consumers.
Yes, it's a pretty busy marketplace these days with different vehicle manufacturers from all over the world. We do obviously target the premium luxury market as well, so there is a certain inherent expectation that vehicles will deliver on all fronts. So it's something that we need to drive more at the very front end of what we do. But as I say, we are seeing more and more consumers in different markets expecting a certain level of environmental performance across the product.
Should we go to another question, Stephen? Hello?
Hello? Yeah, we've got another question here for Jamie, and someone's asking, how much does the company drive improvements up the supply chain with third-party suppliers of parts before assembly? And they're also asking, is there an industry index or standard that you are using to drive improvement up the supply chain?
Good question. We deal primarily with our Tier 1 suppliers, and we may deal directly with some Tier 2 suppliers, but in the main, Tiers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and onwards will then be the kind of domain of Tier 1. We are trying to drive expectations through the supply chain and obviously through our Tier 1 suppliers. So we've got various tools, sets of information that we use with suppliers to get information back from them about the particular material or component that they're supplying to us. So we send out things like environmental checklists to understand the materials that have gone into that particular component, what can be done at the end of life, is there an opportunity for remanufacturing, that kind of thing. So that's a kind of standard activity that we have across Tier 1 supply chain and also research projects. We've undertaken some work looking at a kind of sustainability matrix to work on those that we consider to have a very close strategic relationship with. It's something that I've developed across a range of sustainability indicators, but it should be scalable at all different levels. And the idea there is that they would rank their performance and justify to us why they've scored themselves in that way, and then we'd then look to work with them to improve on that level of performance. We're also taking part in the Aluminium Stewardship Initiative, which kind of covers the entire value chain down the aluminium supply route, and that's done again with our primary aluminium suppliers. But as I say, it covers the entire value chain, and the idea there is that we're getting data back on the entire process and ensuring that a number of sustainability indicators and factors are covered in that process.
If I could just add to that, I mean, there are many organisations doing what Jamie's talking about in terms of just going to their first tier suppliers. So the phrase comes back in terms of when we're looking at the supply chain assessment, we have a very complex supply chain and therefore it's too complicated. And I think kind of, we'll start with your first tier suppliers and then move on. So you can kind of break down the task and start with your first tier suppliers in year one or in year one and year two. And then once you've got comfortable that you've got the resource efficiency and cost improvements with them, then you look at going further down the supply chain. So you don't have to deal with all the complexity that you'll get when you look at supply chain assessment in one go. You know, breaking it down, I think, is a good way to balance that business plan and have a kind of a progression over the number of years. So I think there's a number of organisations, I think HP in the press recently, talking about they're engaging now with just their first tier suppliers. So I'd kind of encourage that type of approach.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for now, but I'd just like to thank Sandy, David and Jamie for their time today and for getting through so many questions, and also for everyone who's joined us for this webinar. Just to remind you all, a recording of the webinar and the presentation slides will be archived on the 2 Degrees platform. So I hope you found today interesting and useful, and any other questions that you might have, then please feed them back to me, and we'll try and get you answers to those. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.